So a note on torque specs that I don't give in the video. So Volvo has generic torque specs depending on the size of the bolt, as long as they aren't torque to yield bolts or specialty bolts. Axle bolts are torque to yield. I believe one of the subframe bolts are torque to yield. I may be wrong here, but you can look at the document I'll provide. But if you want to find the torque spec for a generic bolt, you just measure the diameter, and that is 3.91 millimeters, which means it's about 4 millimeters. So if it's a 4 millimeter diameter threads, this should be an M4 bolt, and you cross-reference the M4 size with that table, and you find the generic torque spec. This isn't a Volvo bolt, this is just a generic bolt I have sitting around to show you guys how to find that torque spec. Okay, first step, put it up on jack stands, take both wheels off. Next step is to remove the tie rod and the lower control arm nuts and take them out of the steering knuckle. It's a lot easier to remove that if you're using a pickle fork. If you take the brake rotor and caliper off and do it from here and pry like that. Put a wrench on there, do the trick to get more torque, and pull. Take off the two brake caliper bolts, 15, one up top, one down bottom. Remove these bolts, they're an 8 millimeter. Take your pickle fork and either hammer it in like this, and then like this. If you do it like this, it won't destroy the bolts, like if you do it like this. Tie rod. Probably better to use a pusher. I don't have a pusher, you can rent one at a parts store. Once that is done, you can put your brake rotor back on and your caliper back on and get it out of the way. Take out all bolts on the wheel well cover. This. There's going to be one here for you. You're probably going to have more here, but I don't. Make sure to look for it. When you're putting this back or taking that off, these studs, locate it. You want to deal with them first, and then everything else will fall into place. Next, you want to drain your transmission with there. The fill bolt is over there. But you're going to drain from here and expect about 2.2 quarts to come out. That's a 24 millimeter. You have an oil pan ready to catch the fluid. Open the cap so it can breathe. Put your wrench on there. Break it loose. Just like a regular oil change. That is what brand new fluid looks like. So if your fluid looks like this, you're good. Remove the sway bar end length, top and bottom, it's a 15. To take the axles out, you take out this center bolt first. This one right here. And then now that the transmission fluid is drained, we're going to put that back in, and we're going to slide a pry bar in between the transmission and the axle, and we're going to hammer the pry bar in until the axle pops out. First, we're going to try and get this out from the center here. We're going to pull back on it, and this should come out pretty easily. Don't worry about it. I put the camera away so I could film it better, but I just stuck the pry bar like this. I hammered it in, and then I pulled like this, and it popped right out. Now I can finish pulling that axle out. Okay, we are under the car, over in this direction over here. That is the passenger side for a US car. This is the transmission over here. You want to look at this bracket over here. And there is a top bolt to this and a bottom bolt to this that you're going to remove, and it constrains a bearing for the drive shaft. There's that weird trilobal shape there. That's the bearing right there that it constrains. You're going to take this off next. You have to pull the axle out of the passenger side, and then you have to push this bearing to the left, and then you can pull it out of the transmission. But this housing constrains that bearing, so you have to move this axle over. But to move that axle over, you have to take it out of here first, same way you did the driver. I misremembered where the lip on the bearing surface was. It's on the far edge there, so you just need to pull it out and to the left, and that's the transmission over there. You don't need to pry it against the transmission. I just pushed it to the left. I didn't hit it with a hammer, and then you can pull it straight out. Remove the battery line leads, remove the box that's in the battery. It's like 3 screws, and then you'll see this engine/transmission mount. You want to undo this screw. You want to pull this open. On the back here there is a screw, a Torx screw. I believe it's a T30 that goes in here from somewhere around here. You want to pull this sensor off here just by pressing that in right there, and then you can pull this off as well. The intake manifold is sort of off, but ignore that. You don't need to do anything with the intake manifold. That's something we're doing separately. You have 2 bolts here. You take off a cover with the air filter in it, and you take off 2 bolts here, one here, one here. You pull the snorkel out. There's a tube here you twist, and then this inside tube you remove the things. Quick note about the vacuum lines on this before you take it out. You have this clip here with the green that goes down to the vacuum pump over here. You have to press this green thing in. It should be on the bottom, and then you can pull that right out. This clip over here, you have to push these down, and you see how that pushes that red thing in. That goes back here. You've got to push on those 2 and pull it out. Over here you see just that sort of red clip that's inside that other piece, and you see coming back over here this clip right here with that little lip right there that gets pushed directly in here. To undo this type of fitting, you hold this red thing down and you pull it out. If you try and pull it out without like that, it'll come like that and it'll lock it even further. You have to pull it in and then pull the hose out, just like this clip seems to work to me over here, where it pushes that red clip in and then you can pull it out. So when you take the air intake/ECU box off, there's going to be a clip here holding this coolant hose. You undo 2 Torx bolts there, and then you have this clip in the way. You undo 1 Torx bolt there, you undo a hex bolt there, and I believe a hex bolt down there as well, and then you pull this off, and then you'll see the starter has bolts that are also studs. We'll look at that in a second. So now that your starter stud bolts are out, they look like this. They held on that thing we talked about that's right there. Your starter has one here, and it has a pin here. Undo these nuts on the back, they give power to the starter, and then you can just wiggle it out, or should be able to just wiggle it out. You can see it's moving. Need 2 hands for that. This is the transmission mount out of the car. You have 1, 2, 3, and then a 4th bolt there to deal with. Don't bother with this. This bolt is also a stud, so you're going to take a nut off that holds this clip, and then you're going to take these 2 bolts out. So if I grab my impact driver, this is a 13. Saw the engine move there. This last bolt with the stud goes up top right here, and now we just have to do this bolt, remove it from the subframe, and then this bolt right here is a 15. That really didn't take much torque. There we go. Your engine is now hanging from 2 true engine mounts, one up there and then one somewhere up there, and now it's completely disconnected from the subframe. We can remove the subframe bolts. These 2 bolts here, those bolts there, and then if we come over to the side, those are your brakes, rotors, whatever. This is a subframe bolt that holds onto that bushing. And then there's one on the other side, and those are your subframe bolts. These three subframe bolts, one is a 21, the other two are a 13. You want to remove these both first on each side before you remove the subframe bolts by the strut, or you could crush yourself with the subframe. Not very pleasant. I mean, it won't kill you, but don't do it. Now you want to remove these two bolts on each side. They're the last thing holding your subframe in. Don't be under there. Don't leave anything valuable under there. Your subframe is going to drop. There's a ton of torque to remove them. You might want to use a breaker bar. Time now outside, but so the next step we have to do is remove this engine mount. There are two bolts here, one there holding the vacuum pump, and then two bolts here. And then we're going to have that center bolt, and once we remove that center bolt, that's what will actually drop the transmission and the engine. But before we do that, realize there's only three mounts, one there, and the one down there we removed. It's only going to be held by that. So we need to go under the car and this is the engine oil pan. You get a very wide, thick piece of wood, and you just support the engine from underneath, not getting that AC line or whatever that is, and just apply a little bit of pressure there, then remove the engine mount bolts we have up here. Okay, so once we have removed these two bolts, that one bolt there, these two bolts here, over there and there, you can pull this off, and it's stuck down here on the vacuum pump here, this plate that's moving. So move the vacuum pump out of the way, and then you pull this out. See, it's impacting there. Get that, you pull that off. And those are the same bolts on the engine mount here. So all that's holding the transmission up on this side now is that bolt and the jack. Now we need to remove this, which is just below the transmission mount we took off. We have a bolt here, here. They should all be size 15, as were the last bolts that we just took off, those three. Now we have the shifter cables and the clutch cable, and they should come off in the same way. So you have this blue clip back here that you take this, you pull this off carefully. Wants to go flying. That's this right here. You're then going to pull this back. That moves back, and that retaining clip stops it from moving back so it doesn't come out on you while you're driving. Pull that back and pull it up, and it should come out of that holder. And now this is just like a ball joint. You just pull that out. Take a screwdriver, pop it there, and that pops right off. You undo these three bolts next. There are 10. Remove this clip from the top of the transmission right here by pushing this in and pulling up. You push this here at the back in and you pull it out. The next step is to remove the hydraulic line that sends fluid to the clutch. That's located, this is your intake manifold. Over here. You want to take this part of the clip, push it towards the front, that metal piece. That clip flew out on me. It shouldn't have, but once it flies out or comes to the front on both sides, you can pull the line, and that'll have brake fluid in it, so be careful. Catch the brake fluid. You can just sort of leave it hanging there right over the bleeder until you're ready to pull the transmission out, which is right now. So you have 10 bolts that go around the transmission bell housing. A lot of them you will have to lower. You will have to lower the engine for and get from the wheel well. But these are two we can start with right here. You have one more immediately here. You have one there, and you have more back there. So now we're going to lower the transmission. You can see one transmission bolt painted right there. We're going to lower the transmission. We should have better access to bolts on the top. You can see it come down. So we're going to want to come in here and undo this electrical connector, same as others. You push down on the back and you pull out. We're continuing to lower the motor after taking that sensor out. We can see some bolts up there we can remove. So now we can take some of these bolts off.
That's why we gotta go work. Just put that housing back over the top of the bearings when you're done, just so that it helps pack them.
Okay. And we can get these two out right here. So coming in from the motor, we see this sensor that goes to the flywheel. That's held in with two T40 bolts, one on the front right there, and then one on the back over there. You need to take that out because that's mounted to the block, but it goes inside the transmission. So take that out with two T40s. Coming in from the engine, we have one more bolt somewhere around here. Right there. So I'm under the car near where we took off the transmission mount. We have one bolt here, one bolt directly above it, one bolt directly above that, and then one bolt directly above that. And those are our last four bolts holding the transmission into the... Don't be like me. This is your bleeder. This would be the top of your engine. There's a ground there at the bottom of your transmission. Take that out. That's a 10 millimeter. But it's okay. I mean, we pulled it out and it didn't break anything, So inside your transmission bell housing is your slave cylinder, which actuates the pressure plate. This thing failed on us brand new, which is why we're doing this a second time and you're seeing this video. You have this pipe in here that goes through a hole here that feeds the hydraulic line to the slave cylinder. You want to replace this as well because it's cheap insurance, and if a $30 parts fails on you after you put the transmission in, it's not going to be nice. You bleed the transmission clutch line here. To remove this is the same clip that you'll find on the exterior, same design of clip. You take needle nose pliers and there's a little indentation there and you pull it out. And then from the outside you should just be able to pull this tube out. That comes out of the transmission. There's the hole. And then this clip should fit in here so you know that it's positively affixed down there. And then this is one bolt which I have left hand tight. It's not hard to get off. And pull the slave cylinder off and replace that. You want to maybe put a tiny amount of grease on this to make it a little easier to get onto the clutch. But you don't want to put so much that it's going to fly out and start hitting the clutch. You just want a tiny amount just in there. And then you can wipe it off and it should be fine. Pull the transmission out. You saw every step. So to undo this, you undo these bolts in a star pattern and the pressure plate and clutch will come off. And to put the new clutch on, you put the clutch alignment tool through the center of the clutch, and then you put that on there together. And then you put the clutch over, you put the clutch pressure plate over the clutch with the alignment tool still in there, and it's going to be poking out here. And then you tighten these in a star pattern, and I'll put the torque spec somewhere. So this is the setup you would see inside your transmission as it comes down. This would be the front of your transmission. This would be your throwout bearing. Mount the transmission on the trans jack. This is the way we chose to route our chain. Then you're going to slide it in and then turn it like that and then start lifting it. You're gonna have to go back and then in and back and in. I went down to Home Depot and purchased these extra long bolts. They're about an inch longer than the ones that came with the transmission. and you should, in theory, have to align 2 of them to get the transmission to line up with the spline. But you should probably do at least 3, because you need 3 points to define a plane. I've gone with 4 just to overdo it, but I've got 4 bolts in here, 1 at each corner, and that will align it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to unchain it from the transmission jack, and I'm going to pull the transmission jack away, and because the bolts are aligning it, I'm just going to push on the transmission that way, and then I'm going to have my buddy over there crank the engine over by hand with a ratchet in the direction that it spins, so that he's not trying to loosen the crank bolt. And when he does that, the input shaft of the transmission should line up with the clutch at some point when it's rotating, and it should push in, and your transmission will be in, and you bolt it in slowly, and then you replace those 4 extra long bolts with the transmission bolts once they're the last ones. This is how we're turning the motor over. We're going to go clockwise. That's a 36mm on a breaker bar, and we're just going to turn it over with that. You don't need much. The spline should align pretty darn quickly. Once you have all 10 bolt holes populated, take out the new bolts and start putting in the actual transmission bolts, and put them in all first, and do them down a little bit, and then torque them to spec. It's open, press the clutch all the way to the floor. Done. Okay, I'm closing it. First step, after the transmission reinstall, you want to reinstall this clutch, this shifter cable bracket here. It uses these 10mm bolts, and because it's an M8, I believe it's 24 Newton meters. I'm going to connect this clip here. Before you put this engine mount back on, you want to put your shifter cables back. Should be reverse of the install. You pull that back, you push it down. I'm gonna need 2 hands for that, and then you come over here and you pop this onto that, and you may need to move this around to get it to line up. You want to install this top transmission mount, or left engine pad as Volvo likes to call it. It's gonna go right there. It's going to go in with these M12 bolts, which you torque first to 30 Newton meters all around, and then 80 Newton meters all around. If you're done with that lower engine pad, as Volvo calls it, do this one. It mounts on these 4 studs right here. The reverse of how we installed it, to get this battery plate over that engine mount. They share the same bolts, and make sure to align the vacuum pump mounting bracket. I will put torque specs on the video. Are you going to have someone maybe push the engine back for you? It still wiggles because it's on the jack. You'll see that moving down there. And then you want to align it with this bolt, and you want to just get it in there, and you want to thread it. And as you thread it in, it'll stay down here, but it'll pull the engine up. You can move it around with the jack if you don't have anybody to help. And this should be tightened to 80 Newton meters. We're going to put the starter back in. It is these 2 bolt holes in this pin. I'll have the torque spec. These are the ones that have the stud in them. That sensor that goes on top of the transmission. If you have the transmission in, like I do right now, this will not fit back in. So what you do is you take this nut off, and you can separate the electrical connector like that. And you can fit this and bolt this in with the transmission in and the coolant pipe in the way. And then you can put this in afterwards and tighten it down. You can do it in 2 pieces. To install the subframe, put wood on a jack and lift heap about here, and then just get it so you can start this bolt, and then go do it on the other side, and then torque the back bolts, and then come back and finish these front ones. You don't want to fill your transmission until the car is put back together and perfectly level, but this is your fill bolt. It's a huge pain to get to, and you take that off, and then you just put a fluid transfer pump in there, and you start pumping transmission fluid in there until it starts dripping out of here. Then you know your transmission is full. My subframe isn't back together yet in this shot, but that's how you do it. This is how you torque the lower control arm. You get a torque wrench and you use a crowfoot. This one can account for an offset in the head length so that it fits on there and still manages to torque without causing an issue. You can do some math if you want to figure out, if you use a crowfoot on your torque wrench, what you need to set the offset by, and it should not be at an angle like that. It should be perfectly straight like that, and then you can